In this world and in our lives, all of our lives, and collectively the entire history and future of humanity can be broken down into one question. One question with two choices that are opposite from one another. Those two choices is something that I began calling a long time ago the divine argument. And in the middle of that divine argument stands us, human beings with our free will. One choice, and it's every single day. It is collectively your entire life. Like I've made in another video, it is the decision that you make at the crossroads. There's really only two. The divine argument, in a nutshell, before breaking it down to make it easy, is the message of love versus the message of pride. It is light and dark, good and evil. They're two opposite messages, fundamentally. One is the message of the world, which is what every one of us, since the day we were born, the world has tried to, and successfully done, for sure in my case, for most of my life, programs us into believing and thinking this way. The message of the world is this, basically. Get and gain everything you possibly can before you leave this earth, because you've only got one life to live. That is the foundation. Everything is built upon, in that way of thinking, the myth of death. That death is the end. We are here for a short little blip. And so fundamentally, what builds off of that foundation is a selfish life. You don't have much time. And what that life does, what that way of thinking does to us, is it puts us into this sort of frantic, careful, distrustful mindset. We live our lives frantically in that way, always worried about what we might not get, always worried about what we might miss out on, what we might not experience. Think about that. You know, you wake up every day of your life, and maybe you go to a job that you don't like, perhaps out of survival, but why are you worried about your survival? And in that way of thinking, the thing is your hope is built up in that. So your hope is anchored into this world and what you can experience out of it and what you can get. Those who pay close enough attention and who live that long enough, you know, even people who call themselves Christians, many of them do live this way. This message of the world is still in their hearts. But if you're paying close enough attention, you will find that no matter how much you get, no matter how much you gain in this life, even if it fills your cup for a little bit, it's as if a hole's at the bottom. And eventually it just spills out. You're left empty again. You know, there's no ultimate fulfillment out of it. There is no landing. There is no wrapping your hand around the doorknob of the door at the end of the hallway. You just never get to that door. Your cup never stays full or starts to overflow. And you may try a new thing, a hobby or a new job, and you do these things, and again, it might do it for a while, but what I've found is that the older you get, it's as if that hole at the bottom of your cup widens. And so all you can do is crank the faucet up harder and put more pressure behind the things that you do, trying to gain, to try to keep that cup full. This is why so many people are so unhappy. and why life has, if you're paying enough attention, or if you have the courage to really admit this, if you're alone at night in bed, it's that it just seems so meaningless. Consume, consume, consume. Devour, gain, get it. The opposite of that message is the only message where you find true meaning in your life. What is the opposite of consume? Lose. To willingly lose is to sacrifice. And true meaning is only found in true sacrifice. If you lose something that matters to you, but you didn't do it willingly, you certainly don't get meaning out of that. Or if you give like, here, take it then. And we do that to God a lot, by the way. We're just like, oh, take it then. We don't gain anything. And actually, God doesn't want sacrifices like that anyways. He doesn't want your begrudging loyalty or your begrudging sacrifice. It's not real sacrifice. It's like, because ultimately, and this is how it gets hard to understand, but when you feel like God is asking something of you that you don't want to give it up, and you just go, here then, take it, but you didn't do it willingly, why did you do it? Because ultimately you wanted something out of it. You just wanted the guilt to go away, maybe. You just wanted to make the Christians around you happy. It's not a real sacrifice in that case, is it? Let me make a quick point, actually, regarding the prodigal son. So many people will read the prodigal son, I think it's in the 15th chapter of Luke. They read that story and they're like, oh, you don't want to be the prodigal son. No. You don't want to be the older brother. And here's why. In my opinion, the most important verse in that whole chapter, that whole story of the prodigal son, is when the prodigal son returns and the dad's overjoyed. It's a picture of God running to us the moment we repent. It's like, I knew it. I knew you'd come back. The older brother is angry. Why are you angry? And what he said was, because I've done all this loyalty. I've been here this whole time. And I've never gotten anything out of it like this. Aha. Older brother. You should have been the prodigal son. Because though the prodigal son went and found some different truth, it wasn't his dad's, and maybe he went and splurged his whole inheritance, and maybe it was like this terrible picture, he was being honest inside. You stayed behind at the farm because you wanted a worldly reward out of it. All these years you pretended to be truly sacrificing, but really it was always for you, so that you got something out of it someday. And so now when the younger brother shows up, you can't be happy for him. Like, somebody who is truly sacrificing for the right reasons is doing it for the message of love, not to get something out of this world. And so the moment younger brother showed up, you should have been overjoyed. Yes, I was hoping that he'd make it. Yes, because you've already made it in your heart. If you really sacrifice for the right reasons, you're already your hope is anchored into the eternity. So no matter what happens on this earth, you don't need anything else. You're fulfilled. But the fact that you were still holding out for some reward means that you weren't actually fulfilled. And that's because your hope was anchored into this thing that you hoped someday you would get out of this world for all these years of loyalty to your father. That's not real. Let me put that image against an image of true sacrifice. My favorite, you might already have caught on if you've listened to even one of my videos, but my favorite image is the man who jumps on the grenade to save another's life. One could say also the woman who, during complications in childbirth, decides to save her baby and die instead. That happens. But it's that same image of sacrifice. In that man's heart, there was something more important to him than his own life. And he was willing to die for it. What that means is that his hope was not anchored into his life here. It means that he decided long before that grenade that he was willing to die for something more than himself, higher, but more, he was willing to live for it all up until his death. The bottom line of the world is, how much can you gain in this life? The bottom line of the message of love is, what are you willing to lose for something higher? It's a letting go. And so many people will hear me say that, oh, you're letting go, you're giving up. And it is such the opposite. I have decided that my life is not as important as the truth. I have decided that my life is less important than unconditional sacrificial love. And that actually the greatest thing that my life could be used for is to make that example in its greatest form. And it is to lay your life down willingly for another. To make that statement. Why do you think martyrs have always had to exist throughout human history? Because I can sit here in front of this camera and talk all I want. But unless I really do it, it's just talk. This is why we need examples like John the Baptist. Why do you think he lived in the wilderness? There's a multifaceted answer to that. He would have had to divide his entire intention. I mean, what does it take to exist in the society now? You have to have a full-time job or more. You basically have to give it your life. I mean, this camera right now is sitting in the front step going into my camper van that I live in because I know that. And I made a decision long ago that I was, my whole adult life actually. Before this, I lived in an SUV for 4.5 years. Before that, it was a tent in the woods for 2 years. And before that, it was just out of a backpack wherever for several years. Came here from Kodiak Island, Alaska, living that way. I made a decision long ago that I didn't want to enslave myself to this world and its system that I didn't necessarily even agree with at my core. And there's a lot more to that. I had my issues, as we all do. I still do. But I wanted meaning in my life. I wanted it to mean, and I think we all are like this almost, that truthfully, we don't want these prideful, selfish lives. Deep down, we all want to know that there is something more important in all of existence than this life and our prideful desires. We want that. I think we all just live these selfish, prideful lives because we don't know what else to do. And we've been programmed to think, and that's what everybody else is doing. It's like we kind of feel backed into a corner to live these lives. But I think, I'm convinced that deep down at the core heart of humanity itself, we are desperate to believe that there is something more important than ourselves. And so when one say they believe in God, what that is supposed to mean is I believe that there is something more important than my life, this world, and I want there to be, and I want to serve it. Is there anything you're willing to die for right now? Is this world still realer to you than eternity? Are you still concerned about what you might not get, might not experience? Do you still feel like you're living a frantic life? I mean, this video and all of my videos are for you. This is why I'm doing this at all. Because I know there's millions of people like you and me out there. You know, there's guys that get off work every single day and they go to the same bar every single evening and they sit at the same stool and the bartender knows what their order is and they've been doing it for 25 years. And there's an honesty in that. It's like, look, I'm coping. Anybody walking around with an angry look on their face, it's honest, man. It's like, this sucks. It's almost like as if that guy that goes to that bar every night, sitting in that chair, and his only hope is like a deeper meaning will just sit in the stool next to him someday. And, you know, this is why Jesus sat with those types of people. This is why he sat with the drunkards. This is while the Pharisees stood in the corner and judged him. Because the Pharisees knew the scriptures in their heads better than anybody really who had ever lived. But they didn't have a bit of it in their heart. And because they didn't understand this divine argument, they didn't even know which side they stood on. They didn't even know. They thought you could be both. And unconsciously, subconsciously, it's not like they sat there and thought about this. Oh, there's the divine argument. Oh, I'm going to put one foot on each side. It's just they live their lives like that. I used to live my life like that. I used to think that I could try to gain and seize control of everything I possibly could and get everything out of this life and be selfish, but I was still the hero that would jump on a grenade. I thought, again, subconsciously, I never made this decision. But in me, that's what I believed. That's how I lived. That's how I moved. It was like I was both. But you can't serve two masters. And how long will you waver between two opinions? Elijah said on Mount Carmel, when he brought the 400-something prophets of Baal up there, and he spoke to the people, to his people, the Israelites. And there was a showdown between God and Satan upon that mountain, who they called Baal. And that was what Elijah said to them. How long will you waver between these two opinions? Don't you know there's a divine argument happening? Don't you know you got to pick a side? You can't be both. Another example I use, it's as if existence itself is represented by two boats at sea, parallel to one another. One's called good, one's called evil. And there's a plank that connects the two of them. 99% of the world likes to try to stand on that plank and not choose. Subconsciously, consciously, whatever it is. But when judgment comes, those boats start to drift away from one another and the plank falls into the water. You got to pick one, because then they're going to come and go to war. And you can't stay neutral anymore. Not allowed. And it's really never allowed. It's just we try to live our lives like that, and it's very meaningless and it's very stressful, and we live frantically. We're not happy or fulfilled. We're living this double-minded life, James wrote. And this is why I wanted to make this video and illuminate these two sides of the argument, is because for many people, even a lot of Christians, this is like a subconscious thing that they haven't brought to the front of their brain and made a conscious decision. The bottom line of my life is, what am I willing to lose, not gain? If you say that you believe in God and you believe that you serve Him, but you don't have that in your heart, you might be mistaken. Because this is what it is. These are two opposing forces. You can't be both. You can't stay on the fence forever. Your hope is either anchored in eternity, and you're here to serve, or your hope is still anchored into this world, and you're here to gain, and you're worried about what you might not. This is the whole, the entire core weaving through the Bible. This is why Paul wrote, "But whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ." Because whatever I'm trying to get out of this world, I'm taking away from my service. This is what Jesus meant when He said, "Thou whoever tries to save his life will lose it. Do not store up things here on earth, but store up things in eternity." Because what is it to gain the whole world? And that's the thing, there's lots of people who have tried that, and if you're paying enough attention, you'll see that these billionaires, millionaires, it's almost as if it's not enough. They still want more. And that's all sin. You never have enough. If your hope is anchored in getting a bunch of women, they'll never be enough. If your hope is anchored in getting a bunch of money, it'll never be enough. It's like drug addiction. Your tolerance builds up and you can't get high anymore, and you got to go get more and more and more and more, and eventually you'll find it's empty. There's not enough in the world. Now this, what are you willing to lose message? This is the message that is foolishness to those who are perishing. The message of the cross. The message of the cross is self-sacrifice for others and or a higher power. It's the same thing. You die for another person. Would you die for? Love. When a woman chooses her baby's life on the delivery table, she's choosing love. She's dying for a higher thing. Not just that person, but for that argument. For that, the good way, the path of love, the ancient way, which is the narrow road and the tiny little gate. Because at the end of the day, and this is why judgment comes, because remember this before I say this next thing. He who began a good work in you will be faithful to finish, even if you can't see how that could possibly happen. If you're hearing my message now and you're like, I'm so far from that, God, you're not even going to get me there. Just like He did with all of humanity as a whole, He will find a way for you too. Me too. But this is why the road is so narrow and the gate is so tiny. Something that the Lord has been telling me for a while now, but it just flowed out of my pen about an hour and a half ago, officially. Because only those who are willing to die for the cross make it through that gate. Spiritually, in our hearts, before we end this life, before we step into eternity, we have to somehow have made that true decision in our heart and actually gotten. That is what Paul meant when he said, I finished the race. He's at the end of his life and he's like, Lord, you did it. You made me a man willing to die for you. I'm ready to go. It would be better for me to be with Christ than to be on the earth. And you'll know you arrive there when that's genuinely how you feel. And, oh, it's so sad, right? It sounds so sad. No. Nobody in a room with Paul would have been more joyful than Paul. Because it's actually so crazy that you become that way, And right when you stop frantically trying to seize everything in this world and you let go, that's when everything that's worth living for finds you. That's when you find the peace of God. That's when you find true joy every single day as a state of being. People can't even take it from you if they want. They can't. They try. They will try. And they can't have it. Because it's not anchored in this world. It's not anchored to my current mood. It's not anchored to some job or career I hope I'll get. It's not anchored to this woman or this man. It's not anchored to even these kids. It's anchored to an eternal being who always wins.